Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. Can we all just turn off our mics and cameras, please? And then, we'll be starting shortly. So thanks once again for joining us. Today, we'll be discussing the future of TV, including developments in artificial intelligence, as well as the regulatory responses needed for this new technology. So our guest today will be Aynon Doyle from MultiChoice. He will take us through this, and we are delighted to be joined by him. So please feel free to leave any questions and comments you have at any time in the chat box, and then we will take all the questions right at the end. Thank you, everybody, and welcome, Aynon. I'll now hand it over to you.
Thank you, Fencer. Well, thank you to everybody on the call as well for coming through today. I will turn off my video when I start the presentation because I think it might interfere with the speed of the slide deck, but I thought it would be useful just to pop it on so you can see me. This is a very hot topic. It's sometimes a contentious topic. It's also a very difficult one to present on because in your audience, you may have people who know of AI only in very general sense, and those who are experts and are using it within our companies right now and today. And I won't dare to call myself an expert. My interest in this is purely from the aspect of future regulation and what that means for our business as we go forward using these AI technologies. So the first question is, what is AI? Well, artificial intelligence can be described as an area of computer science. It focuses on creating systems that essentially are attempting to duplicate human intelligence, the ability to learn and to problem solve. And in essence, at this point, it is done by capturing huge amounts of data, processing it, learning from that data, and from that it streamlines and improves the software. And in doing so, it mimics the human neural networks in the brain to create systems that learn like humans, and unlike normal computer programs, do not require human interaction in order to fix and improve those processes. I think it's important to point out AI is not a new concept. The idea of automatons that move by their own will and not human intervention has been with us for quite some time. There are references to Talos, a bronze automaton developed by the Greek god Hephaestus that was able to defeat his enemies. But it was also found that many of the early writers on philosophy, like Plato, engaged with the concept of what it means to be human and what it would mean if something else were to gain intelligence that was similar to human. And we also saw, as early as 400 BC, some mechanical devices being created by craftsmen of that period. And even in the Middle Ages, we saw Leonardo da Vinci attempting to create self-moving, very primitive robots utilizing suits of armor. So the idea of automatons, those that move by themselves without the human interaction, has been with us for some time. It has also been very interesting to find that it's been a subject of not just the mythology, but also of fiction. One of the earliest in the 1800s was a book by a German author, de Sandman, which proposed the idea of a man falling in love with a mechanical doll, but not realizing that it wasn't human. And of course, this has appeared in film, early film, the black and white. We have Metropolis, which also engaged with the idea of an automaton, a robot that moves by itself, is capable of thought and mimicking human behavior. And more recently, if we look at the 50s, fiction once again, I, Robot, Isaac Asimov proposed the idea of robots and how humans would interact with them. And we have that interesting aspect similar to H.G. Wells where fiction and reality overlap. So within that book, he developed the idea of the 3 laws of robotics. The irony, of course, being the 3 laws of robotics are meant to protect humans, but at the same time, the subject matter of his book was about a robot who overcame those laws of robotics by essentially becoming self-aware. As I said, fiction mirrors reality. Isaac Asimov's The Three Laws of Robotics have been often discussed by those computer engineers who engaged in AI development on how one may incorporate similar laws into robots or AI so that they would not harm human beings. So three laws we could see as being almost an early attempt at regulation, the idea that you could hardwire something into the AI that would prevent it from harming humans. And then, of course, we'll be talking of popular culture, we must turn to the science. So the first proper science on AI was Alan Turing. His paper, Computing Machinery Intelligence, wrote about how to build intelligent machines, and perhaps more important, how to test their intelligence, how to determine if they were becoming more like humans. And the Turing test in that paper proposes you achieve an AI imitation of a human when you can communicate with both a human and a machine and cannot see a difference between the computer's communication and the human. Of course, the research in AI was hampered in the 1950s to the 1980s by the simple fact that the computers at that time did not have the necessary computational power. It was only in the 1980s that we saw AI research really taking off because of the increase in computational power. And that since then has been driven by Moore's law, that memory and the speed of computers doubles every year. Of course, at some point we'll reach an aspect where it would be impossible to put any more transistors on a chip. And then, of course, Moore's law would fall away. And that's why we see that there's a lot of attention being developed into looking at other mechanisms other than chips to deal with computational power and speed. The 1980s also saw a broadening of the algorithmic toolkit and, of course, much more research and development funding. And so it was no surprise that in the 1990s, we saw, in a very narrow aspect, IBM's Deep Blue, a chess playing program, for the first time was able to defeat a world chess champion. We also saw speech recognition software being developed. Some of you early adopters in the audience may remember Dragon software. So in the digital age, or this age of big data that we live in, Moore's law has enabled that growth in capacity to capture much more data than any one person can possibly process. And that leads to the application of AI very effectively in industries such as banking, marketing, entertainment, communications, and IT, where the importance of analyzing data and the ability to predict behavior are fairly important. But we also see the zeitgeist. I see some of my pictures appeared ahead of time, giving it away. We also see the zeitgeist of the time. 2001, A Space Odyssey, we saw a move away from the idea that AI must occupy a human form in the form of a robot. And AI was, and at the time, is once again, it's where the area of fiction and reality overlap. At that time, when Stanley Kubrick was busy with the film, IBM computers occupied entire rooms with a keyboard to interface with it. So the idea that intelligence could exist separate from the human form was starting to develop quite well. Of course, we know that from then we went back to the first IBM personal computers. But as time moved on, we're moving once again to, if we look at that Meta lab there, we're moving again to the idea of a supercomputer that occupies entire rooms. The computational power required for the supercomputers and also AI, if we ask to push AI. Sorry?
No, sorry, you can go ahead, Aynon.
Okay. The computational power of these supercomputers is required in order to achieve the ultimate expression of AI. But as we go along, these banks will be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's predicted that in the next decade, some of these supercomputers may require the same power that one would operate a small city on in order to operate. So, of course, the zeitgeist, this idea of computers that no longer occupied in bodies, but are occupying these data banks and the internet itself, we see as reflected in the fears that people have in the Terminator movies, Skynet that uses the internet to overcome humans, launch the nuclear missiles. And so we're seeing, of course, the fear of that mimics the human. But once again, we always have to distinguish the reality versus the fiction. So yes, AI is becoming.
Hello, Aynon, I think we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Sure.
I think there might be a delay because of the slides. So the reality versus the fiction is that, yes, AI has become much more pervasive across all aspects of technology. And these days, we may not even know whether we are interacting with the AI or whether we are seeing content which has been generated by AI bots. But we're really still very far away from AI that can duplicate human intelligence. What we're seeing today is really just very highly complex automation rather than real intelligence. And so what we see is that researchers would break that general concept of AI into three distinct categories or levels. And research on AI today is really focused on two categories. The first is the one that we're familiar with, artificial narrow intelligence, ANI, or which some people refer to as weak AI. And although this weak AI, which is performed on only specific tasks, can outperform humans in those tasks, much like a calculator could outperform a human in how it calculates, they're still very much focused. They're unable to perform in any other task. So they're very good at performing on that specific defined task, but they can't work in any other one. So what we see, if we look at something like ChatGPT can generate us text. It can maybe associate an image with the text, but it's unable to do what another highly specific AI that generates images can do, or one that generates video. So they're all very high in performance, but only on those specific tasks. The second category of artificial general intelligence, AGI, is really the next evolution of AI. It's what everyone is chasing, but which no one has achieved yet. If AGI were successfully developed, one would be able to not only observe and learn in terms of the AI, but also to apply what it has learned in one area to another unfamiliar area. In other words, AGI would be what primitive biological life can do. It can take a learning, fire burns me, and apply it in other areas to the harms that heat could apply to us. So it's only once we've achieved that AGI that we could consider the next category, the ultimate evolution, which has been reflected in film and in fiction, and philosophers have debated with, that of artificial consciousness. This implies that the AI becomes sentient, it becomes self-aware. And unlike intelligence, which we can quantify, the question of consciousness or self-awareness is essentially a philosophical one. Most researchers put that idea of artificial consciousness in terms of the evolution of AI to be at least 100 years away from now. So it'll be in the next century, the 22nd century, that we would see that. It's interesting if we look at where we engage with ANI, that weak AI, what it can do. Crack.com wrote an article where it asked various AI tools on the internet to comment on a movie about AI, Spielberg's film, artificial intelligence. And so we see on the left a prompt, which was to ChatGPT, tell me your opinion of the 2001 film AI. And what we see is a film analysis that has been done that we really couldn't tell apart from a film critic who had evaluated the film. Similarly, a prompt was given to OpenArt AI, create some fan art for the 2001 film AI Artificial Intelligence. And once again, we see an image that we cannot tell has not been developed by a human. So the key thing here is that these tools with a very narrow specific focus are rapidly approaching the Turing test of being able to have a conversation or to generate something that we could not tell apart from what a human has done. An interesting study which was done not more than a year ago had a number of composers sitting in a room and listened to various music that had been played. And they couldn't tell the difference between what had been composed by a human and what had been composed by music generating AI tools. So we are rapidly approaching that area of the Turing test. That doesn't mean that we have artificial consciousness. It just means that we are reaching that point where the tools have achieved enough data that they're actually able to imitate humans to a certain extent. We now move to a very focused section, which is most applicable for our businesses, that of generative AI. Generative AI is AI technology that could produce various types of content: text, imagery, audio, synthetic data, which is essentially similar to mock data. And what this enables is that we can have chatbots, which could do customer service or technical support. We're able to have subtitles on the live news broadcasts for the hearing impaired, although those that do watch the live news will notice that these tools sometimes have a difficulty in distinguishing on accents. And if you were deaf, you would be playing a game of sounds like, because sometimes a word that has been said is not the right word. It is put something that sounds like what was said. But as more and more people use these tools, so it can improve, so it can learn, and it'll be able to overcome those difficulties as its library of people who are speaking enlarges. We're seeing dubbing for movies or TV translation into different languages. We've seen, as I highlighted on the previous page, photorealistic art, which is already being employed in marketing materials. It can improve products, videos, edit videos, write music, create deep fakes of people, recommend new avenues of testing. It's already been used in the testing of drug compounds. It can design products and architecture, and it could respond to emails, write resumes, profiles, or research papers, which, as we saw in recent news this year, is a challenge for UNISA in order to determine whether a response to an exam question has been written by the student or ChatGPT. So we're seeing this growth in AI tools, a disruption in the media value chains. AI video creation platforms like Synthesia claim to be able to write scripts, edit videos, animate the videos with AI, add voiceovers in 120 plus languages, and increase the speed to create and edit video by 80% and reduce the cost by 50%. Of course, that is for a very short video clip. It's not yet applicable to large-scale cinematic movies or for television shows. And it can also be quite imperfect on some of the writing, so human editing is still required. And then the other big question, which relates to intellectual property rights, it needs data. In order to achieve what those AI video creation platforms want to achieve, they need to have writing, examples of writing, video clips inputted in order to generate. So once again, we're not at the area of an artificial general intelligence, which can take something and create something new. We're still in that area of the weak AI. It can only learn from the data that's put in, or that old computer saying, garbage in, garbage out. But it is certain that within a time period of perhaps 10 to 20 years, generative AI could enable a new era of filmmaking, where one wouldn't need cameras, you wouldn't need sets, you wouldn't need locations, and you perhaps wouldn't even need actors. So how far away is this? A study that was done in 2023 with US workers in the film, TV, music industries, we're looking at timeframes and how realistic it would be able to achieve them in the next 2 to 3 years. So in the next 2 to 3 years, we can see there seems to be quite a high degree of optimism that you'd be able to create realistic sound effects that can be used in film, TV, or games by AI. You could autocomplete code to assist in game programming. You could develop 3D assets for film, TV, video games, virtual worlds. You could create realistic sounding foreign language dubbing of film, TV dialogue. You could create realistic voices for film, TV, or games, or even duplicate the voices of existing actors to be used in certain cases. you could develop artwork for film, TV, or game storyboards. Where they have less confidence that it can be achieved in the next 2 to 3 years is to create realistic synthetic actors for film or TV, or to really be able to write song lyrics or write film or TV scripts. So those areas would still require a human intervention or creativity. But we could say it's not really that far at all. The BBC last year, this is a headline from one of the newspapers, is that they will be looking to write headlines using artificial intelligence, and they are trialing various AI tools which would help reporters to work more quickly. And if we look at ourselves in terms of our own businesses, in terms of text, code, video generating, video editing, avatar creation, speech, music, or sounds, we're already using a number of AI tools, whether it be ChatGPT, Codex, Runway, Synthesia, Deep Dub. All of these tools are becoming increasingly more used within our industry. Of course, they do not replace the humans, but they are helpful in terms of ideation and in doing some of the grunt work that takes up time. We're also seeing in film the replacement of huge amounts of extras. You can map an extra and duplicating to create the crowds. This has been used in a number of films already. But there are concerns about generative AI in film. One of the first, of course, is the digital doppelgangers. In 2023, the Hollywood actors' strike was about actors' images being created and used in film without their permission. And the outcome of the strike was an agreement with the studios on AI usage, specifically around the images of actors, that it required their consent. And if an image of an actor was used, they would, and was used in the film, for the amount of time it was used in the film, the actor would be remunerated as if it was him that was in the film. But it's clear that there would also be job losses. AI exploitation across the production value chain results in less people being needed to do jobs in creation and production. And we're seeing this in studios, the high degree of automation, the number of people required to manage a production are reducing in number. A key element, though, that has also been raised is that of intellectual property infringement and data privacy. As we mentioned right at the beginning, AI needs big data. And to achieve this, actions like web scraping are used with no regard to copyright or permission of the original creators or IP owners. And this is becoming the focus in a number of court cases that are underway at this point in time. So we're seeing those real-world impacts are beginning. Questions being raised: will artificial intelligence replace songwriters? But digital clones are being made by AI tech, which could make extras obsolete. And so we saw the outcome of those strikes, which I briefly mentioned previously. We're also seeing increase in the number of lawsuits against OpenAI and Meta. Sarah Silverman, who's a comedian, is suing them, alleging that her copyright had been infringed in the training of those firms' AI systems, which to a certain extent is true. When you web scrape and you want to train your AI on how to tell jokes, you scrape all the comedian's material, and then the AI takes that material and repurposes it much in the same way a kindergarten youngster would tell a joke that he'd heard previously, but add his own spin on it. We also seen the New York Times suing OpenAI, Microsoft, over the use of their articles, which were used to train chatbots. Now, of course, the opposite of that is the big companies argue that this falls under fair use, that they are doing it initially for the purposes of research and development in terms of the training of the AI, and at the end, the product that is being used, that is being relayed to the public, and for which financial benefits are being obtained, does not reflect the work of these artists or the New York Times. And we're seeing it's becoming quite more personal. Those of you who use Office 365 would have seen that for a certain payment of a fee, you could have your own AI assistant. And a number of companies have also deployed that AI assistant Copilot, and according to IT Web, already developing or seeing an improvement in their productivity. But of course, when you use AI assistants, you've got to be aware of what they are doing without your knowledge. An interesting article in 2015, My Robot Bought Illegal Drugs, was from Switzerland, where as part of an artistic engagement with technology, two artists put up a random darknet shopping generator that went around and bought on their behalf without their inputs. It moved by its own will to go do shopping on the darknet. And amongst the things it bought was some shirts, a copy of a Turkish passport, and 10 pills of ecstasy, which could have landed them into legal difficulties. Thankfully, although their products were all seized, their computer was arrested, they themselves as artists are protected in Switzerland underneath the creativity laws as they were engaged in an artistic activity. But it raises the question, the ethical question of who's responsible when AI makes a mistake? Who's responsible when AI does something which can be construed to be illegal? It's also important to point out that lawmakers often react to the perceived as much as they do to the facts. So early on when we were talking about the zeitgeist, that idea of the Terminator, an artificial intelligence that takes over the world, there's been a lot of warning. It's part of the human perception of technology. And you have experts such as Elon Musk urging a halt to AI training because of a threat to humanity. We have artificial intelligence warnings from other experts who claim that it could lead to the extinction of humanity. So that's the perceived threat. It's not reality. As we mentioned, we're still a long way from an artificial general intelligence, and we're still dealing with the very weak AI. But this brings it to the lawmakers' intelligence, and we're starting to see steps in the US, in the EU, which are treating the future AI that could be the general intelligence, artificial consciousness as a threat, and are developing legislation to deal with it. But probably the more reality, I think, for me, the greater threat is possibly not an AI that tries to take over the world, but what is happening today. So here we have deep fakes. Meet the fake Tom Cruise. This is someone who started TikTok. We had used an AI tool to simulate Tom Cruise, and then started a company which has raised approximately 7.5 million from investors. And he's doing this with Tom Cruise's permission. He secured his permission, and he mentioned that he did do this also to raise how do you secure your own digital identity. But as much as you have the legitimate steps of using deepfakes, you also have the illegitimate. So we saw recently, it's claimed that Russia targeted the Paris Olympics with a deepfake Tom Cruise video. I don't know why everyone targets Tom Cruise, where they used an AI-generated audio of Tom Cruise to disparage the Olympic Committee. And another area that this goes into is nearly 4,000 celebrities were found to be victims of deepfake pornography. In the UK, 255 British actors and news presenters found out that they had also been doctored into fairly explicit images. The initial perception might be, well, that's the celebrities, people target celebrities. But the idea is that deepfake technology is a threat to all, in this article, women, but I would say to all people, not just the celebrities. But the fact that this is being used, the concern that it might be used with things such as revenge porn, in which there are existing laws, has led to it being deemed a criminal offence in England and Wales due to a new amendment to their criminal justice bill. Once again, another area which is very real and very current beyond AI taking over the world is bias and race in AI algorithms. The AI algorithms, as I mentioned, they web scrape the internet, they take all that information, they really don't have an ethical window or a emotional view in which to view that data, and so they use it in ways that might be detrimental to humans. So we see this warning from the EU's competition chief about For her, a more pressing concern would be how AI tools, when used by banks to determine when someone's eligible for a loan or a mortgage, might have some forms of racial profiling in them or some forms of bias in their algorithms. The other area of concern is fake news. Well, we know fake news is not new. It's been around for quite some time. This is a 2016, around about the time of the elections, and we saw fake news being put in. But the concern with AI and fake news and misinformation is, and this is a current picture of the current election, is that it's very difficult to tell it apart from the real. In fact, AI image misinformation has surged. It's becoming more increasingly difficult to tell the difference between what is real. People who are on YouTube may get excited seeing an official trailer of a sequel to a film that they'd previously watched, only to discover in a very small fine print once they start viewing that, or even not even that, but in the text itself below that video, that in fact this is a fan-made and not an official trailer at all. So we're living in a period where it's becoming increasingly difficult to tell what is real and what is not real. The other area of concern from the perspective of regulation is the use of AI in cyber attacks and also in cyber terrorism. And of course, it's not only the terrorists who are developing AI, we're also seeing weaponized AI being developed by some of the leading nations in the world, the US, Russia, China. In some various EI are investigating how AI can be used and weaponized in terms of executing cyber attacks. And that, of course, will then shape how we approach it in terms of our laws. And a big concern in terms of cyber attacks is not just the big national issues, but also the small issues where deepfake technology gets used to generate messaging, images of the CEO of your company that can be used to phish, to elicit secure data from your company. The first steps, of course, to deal with this is always industry self-regulation. I think NAB USA is looking at this, and I'm sure within a year or two, NAB in South Africa will also be looking at this, is before government steps in and imposes laws which may inhibit or disturb business or inhibit how you are able to monetize this technology, the industry should embark on some forms of self-regulation. And when we look at that self-regulation, there was a great article by George Skunstein from Forbes, and he proposed you would be looking at privacy, that your AI systems should respect and protect the individual's privacy rights, safeguard their personal data, and use that data appropriately. Continuous improvement, which is to improve your AI systems and address their shortcomings. As I mentioned earlier on, if you have AI that is providing subtitles for your newscast, you would be continuously monitoring, evaluating, and improving that so that that system learns. Human control. Humans should remain in power over those systems, and decisions and actions should always be made with a view of the human values and ethical considerations. And then, of course, intellectual property. Determine who owns what the AI is generating, but also at the same time be careful of what data you're using to create an AI model, to ensure that you do not find yourself in continuous court battles about the IP. He also further provides that with those principles, when you look at governance, there should be fairness, design those AI systems to avoid bias or discrimination, transparency, provide explanations and justifications so that users can understand and trust you in terms of what is being used. Accountability, hold those who develop and implement the AI systems in your business accountable for the impact and consequences. Reliability, once again, ensure that they're error-free, that they perform very well across different scenarios and data sets. Prioritize the well-being of all the users and the general public. Ensure that people can access these AI systems and receive an equal opportunity to benefit from their use. It's no surprise to see that one of the earlier broadcasters who has moved in this area of self-regulation is the BBC. And they're moving fairly rapidly, I must say. They first made an announcement in October 2023 of three principles which would underpin their approach to AI. One was to harness generative AI to strengthen their public mission, so deliver to their audiences, but also mitigate the challenges that generative AI could create in terms of the trust in the media, protection of copyright, content discovery. They also undertook to always prioritize talent and creativity. In other words, not to replicate or replace human creativity, and be open and transparent and clear with audiences when a generative AI output features in BBC content and services. A good example of this is there was a recent Netflix documentary about a person who had murdered her parents, and about 26 minutes into that documentary, certain photographs were placed on screen. And afterwards, a number of people noted that the photographs themselves had appeared to be manipulated by AI in terms of the backgrounds that didn't appear to be in the original photographs. And in some cases, the expressions or hand gestures that that person who the photograph had been taken of. The production staff said, well, of course, we always use photo editors and that. There might be images in the background that one wouldn't want to show. But it highlights that people are becoming more aware of these. And then, of course, if you put something in a documentary that is later going to go into archives, it raises the question once again about the truth, whether there's been a manipulation of the truth. This year, as I said, they're moving fairly rapidly. The BBC are operating under what they call a responsible AI framework, which they have published editorial guidance on the use of AI by the BBC. They've also produced a BBC AI handbook for their staff, which is taking those principles that we've mentioned and being more practical, focused on how they would be used by staff. And the key is this is not a once-off by the BBC. They see this as an evolving ethical AI framework to create a safe and trusted environment for their viewers. If we look globally, the approach to policy and the regulations around AI is very fragmented. And most countries, when they're approaching AI policy and rulemaking, will tend to approach it in very specific instances. So we see amendments are being proposed to existing legislation to update it, to address generative AI. Example, amendments proposed to copyright law, updates to criminal laws to address deepfakes, revenge porn, updates to existing laws that deal with data privacy, misinformation, and fake news. We saw recently the FCC in the USA proposed rules this month to address AI-generated content in political ads. And they proposed rules on broadcasters, both in radio and television, on what they should do in order to disclose the use of AI-generated content in political ads. The FCC are also looking at the telco industry, so they're not just looking at media, in terms of regulating AI-generated calls and texts, and also looking at the technologies that get used to detect and mitigate the illegal and unwanted robocalls. Although it is fragmented in the rest of the world, maybe before moving on, I shouldn't knock the US and say they're only looking at a specific instance, because we do know that approximately a year ago, Biden did bring out an executive order. But the executive order it's not legislation, but the executive order does require AI firms to provide data to government so that they could address the security and safety issues and the protection of consumers in this area. So there does seem to be a start that they will move beyond that fragmented approach to a more focused approach on AI policy. But we can definitely say that the EU is a first mover on AI regulation. They agreed more than a year ago on a deal on the regulation of artificial intelligence, and that deal itself emerges from work that began as early as 2021 in the EU. And this year in March, they approved the first comprehensive AI law, which is the AI Act, which is going to be classifying AI products according to risk and adjusting the scrutiny and regulation thereof according to that risk, which would be measured. So what are those main points in the EU AI Act? Well, the focus of the Act is to regulate that AI based on its capacity to harm society. We have this pyramid on the right, which shows what they would identify AI products and categorize them as either being minimal, no regulation required. So, for example, software that deals with scams, limited risk, which would be AI where they would like to see more disclosure. So if you have AI in a documentary, AI in a film, if you have AI in a TV show, there would be specific transparency obligations that would be applied in which you would have to put either before or after in terms of advisories to audiences. And then they move to the high risk, which I would imagine would be those that have cybersecurity and the potential for criminal usage. And then the unacceptable risk, which is where they would just ban it out and say you can't do that type of research at all. So that would create a common regulatory and legal framework for the use of AI in the EU. And then the national member countries of the EU would start looking at specific legislation that they would implement in their own national jurisdictions. We're seeing the same thing happening in Africa. There's the African Union's Continental Strategy and Digital Compact, which has been endorsed by all the communication ministers from Africa. There's not too much known about the document. It's still in variously a draft stage, but it does aim to harness the power of AI to accelerate development in Africa, and at the same time to regulate and foster ethical AI practices and mitigate the risks which were highlighted early on around things such as deepfakes, bias, and so forth in AI algorithms. SADC has also begun steps around an AI policy. We had the Windhoek Statement 2022, so 2 years ago, where SADC ministers undertook that they would concentrate on developing AI policies, both to around the economic exploitation as well as the regulation to protect users. And we have now, within this year, seen the steps in South Africa. An AI national policy is being proposed. It was launched at an AI government summit in April 2024 by the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. We've already seen a discussion document. If you haven't seen it, I would say that you should take a look at it. I think the initial response by experts in the industry has been a bit negative towards the policy. The general view is that it's still a draft plan. It's still got a lot of work to do. AI is not one thing. It's not just generative AI. We've got cybernetics, problem solving, deep learning, machine learning, robotics, neural networks. There's a whole lot of research that's going on. And if you're developing your draft national AI plan, it needs to look at all of these areas in focus in terms of the development thereof. We also saw a recent article, once again, where the journalists had gone out to various experts, and they see it as a good first step in establishing a policy, but it doesn't really prepare the country for the impact of AI, and much more work needs to be done. And I'm sure that from our sides, as industry, we would be making our own comments on this as it starts to move from becoming draft policy to policy and eventually resulting in legislation and regulations. Some concluding thoughts. Clearly, the media sector in South Africa will begin with self-regulation, but ultimately we cannot escape regulation by government. There are too many issues. The only question is the degree of government regulation that will be applied to the use of AI tools and the use of AI in media. Definitely, the EU AI Act is going to shape AI governance in Africa, whether it's directly or indirectly. The law applies to providers who are marketing AI systems in the EU market, irrespective of whether they are established in the EU or from a third-party country. And so the implication of that extraterritorial application is if they are African AI companies who are targeting European markets, they will be bound by this law. And thus we can expect to see the so-called Brussels effect. So just as we saw how the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, rolled down into our markets and into our companies, and we saw it being captured also into the African data protection laws. It's ideally because it's lobbying by parties. If you want to participate in EU markets and you want to participate in Africa, it helps for there to be similar laws in place. AI is going to raise a number of issues for us. There's the freedom of speech issues because of its potential for surveillance and censorship, trust issues around fake news and misinformation, transparency, the requirements that might be imposed on media to disclose when they have used AI tools, human control, ensuring that we do have some control over the tools in terms of ethical considerations and creativity, and accountability, being responsible for the actions of the AI tools. There's a huge potential. So I've dwelt a little bit on the negatives because a lot of the regulation will be focusing on the negatives, but there's huge potential for AI to improve media and broadcasting value chains. It's going to be tremendously of tremendous assistance in fighting content piracy, although there may be some concerns about how it fights that content piracy, because to a certain extent it does involve web scraping by the tool in order to find the content that has been pirated. It will no doubt improve our content moderation and curation, and definitely the pros far outweigh the negative cons to AI evolution and the implementation of that AI in our business and lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Aynon. Great presentation. Certainly a lot to digest there. We have about 10 minutes, so now we'll open it up for questions and comments. I see a hand from David. You can go ahead.
My apologies, as I just wanted to congratulate Aynon on a great presentation. Sorry.
All right, thank you, David. Yeah, any questions or comments on the presentation? And then a question from, oh yeah, we have David Magubiane. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a question as well, just to say thank you for the great presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David. And from me, I think I just want to see, are we seeing locally any significant shifts as far as AI and TV is concerned?
Well, I think when AI tools are used properly, you don't see the shifts. They're there, they're being used. They're definitely being used in paid television to a certain extent. That they're being used in the production of content. Just what you could do with some of the AI tools reduces the costs that would normally be associated with green screen technology. So definitely in the production value chain, it is being used. We're not writing scripts with it yet. I don't think the AI tool, as we mentioned there, the timeframes where people saw this happening, that's definitely not within the next 2 to 3 years. Even something like ChatGPT, when you interact with it, it responds well to some questions, but other questions you quickly determine that you're not engaged with a human, and you can get some fairly wild content being generated by the tool. So the tools aren't yet ready to to be used by themselves, to have their own will. They still require human intervention. Where they are very useful is in ideation, in other words, in the creative process. So we have seen, for example, in marketing, posters, both here and in the US, where you have posters for concerts. Quite often, they being the first draft of it is being done by AI, which reduces the period of time that an artist would have to engage with developing that poster, or developing a specific image that's being used in marketing. But it's basically it does the first run, and then the human steps in and manipulates the images further, so that it is ready for use in marketing, various products. So I think that's the key thing, is that when AI tools are used properly, you don't know they're being used. They're in the background. They're not in the front. But consumers are initially now, because to a certain extent, when an AI tool, especially image or video, is used, there's a hyper-realistic, almost glossy appearance to it. So people are able to spot it at this point in time. But as the technology advances, it'll become more and more real, and it'll be more and more difficult to identify when an AI tool has been used. But I suppose the key aspect for us becomes the issue of transparency. Do you wait for government regulators to require you to be transparent in an advisory, so much as the way as we have advisories now around alcohol, sex, nudity? We might have an advisory that we have to develop around when AI is being used in specific programming materials or adverts.
Thanks so much, Aynon. We have a hand up from David. You can go ahead.
Oh, no, this time it's a real hand. Thanks, Afet. Aynon, just on the guides on self-regulation, and of course, one of the points was that there are less, can I call it, less dangerous AI tools that we use. And at which point do we decide as to which is less dangerous? Because a nail clipper in the right hands can be a very dangerous tool. So that discrepancy when it comes to how do we regulate on that basis?
Yeah, exactly. It's that old axiom, a scalpel in the hands of a surgeon saves a life, and in the hands of a killer, you Jack the Ripper. So it's just because a tool can be used for a negative purpose doesn't mean that we should negate the good that it does. And I think that's the area where we'll see laws being developed. They'll be developed specifically around where the technology is used in a negative fashion. So we highlighted deepfakes. Deepfake has very specific usages which are beneficial for our industry. It can reduce harm to an actor. So, for example, if you're shooting sequences where you don't want to expose your actor or your set to insurance risks, the ability to replace that actor with something which is indistinguishable from the actor is beneficial. However, where that same technology is used to place the actor in sequences that he was never in, such as the Russian documentary using Tom Cruise's voice, or using Taylor Swift and putting her into porn scenarios, those are clearly highly illegal. And so what we'll see is laws that will come into place very specific for when the technology is being used in a way it shouldn't. But similarly, it's the same thing as we have advertising rules that apply to ensuring that a sponsor of a program is being disclosed around an advert that might not appear to be an advert. We can expect similar rules to be imposed on broadcasters around transparency, that when they have used something that wasn't the actor, that would become, I think, the area where it steps into. If we look into other areas, once again, the fake news and misinformation, I think that one also becomes quite important. I think I was in Joburg recently, and I came in on the tail end of a newscast, and since I'm not resident in Joburg all the time, I wasn't aware that there was a fake news segment on a legitimate radio station. So my first hearing of it was, did I hear that right? And then there was a brief pause after that, and then it was, this is a fake news segment, which I think is being used, obviously, by the station to generate some interest from its audience. But they kind of, I would imagine, because I came in the tail end, I didn't hear first advisory, I heard the last advisory. But the key thing is that when we look, there are a number of websites out there that purport to be news sites, and they are putting material which is fake news. We've seen cases fairly recently with Camilla Harris, footage that purports to be her on a number of what one would call right-wing news sites in the US. And but later on, it came out that it wasn't Kamala Harris. So I think news will be another area where government regulation might focus on, both in terms of the transparency, but also the prevention. So we'll probably see, perhaps in the future, amendments in legislation in South Africa around takedowns. In other words, the ability to take down a news site that has put out fake and misinformation. We're seeing the Film and Publications Board has stepped into that area loosely of online regulation. Some of their provisions, of course, already out of date in the AI era, so we might see further amendments to that, or a decision to move online regulation somewhere else other than the FPB. It seems to be, in my view, kind of the odd place to have an online regulation together with an advisory, audience advisory thing. But that's where it is currently. So I think, yes, we are moving into an area where both the industry as well as the regulators are going to be looking at both the lawful use as well as the unlawful use of AI tools.
Thanks, Aynon. We're almost out of time, but I'm just going to take the last question from Philippa. Philippa, you can go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, Aynon. Excuse my voice, I'm a little bit sick. Yeah, it was a great presentation. My question is around sort of fake. I suppose it's going to fake news and it's going to deep fakes and what potentially just being able to understand what's fake and what isn't fake. And I was quite interested this morning. I saw there was an article that Google is now adding a marker on its search results indicating South African companies, and this is obviously part of the bigger inquiry that the Competition Commission is doing currently in its platforms market inquiry. And I was just wondering your thoughts on whether these bigger companies like Google and Facebook, etc., they should also have obligations in order to filter out these kind of fake stories, because I know from our experience on the news side is that often they get these fake stories are actually paid for, and there's no incentive, at least for the bigger companies like Google or Meta, to remove them from their platforms, and whether you think that this should be part of the remedial action that the Competition Commission deals with going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Pippa. Absolutely. The big digital media platform companies play a large part in the distribution of what is fake news. A lot of attention got focused on Facebook and Google because of the Taylor Swift incident of the fake porn that had been distributed of her, and it was being distributed across these platforms, WhatsApp platforms. And so this raised the issue of this is content that is illegal, it is harmful to people, and yet it's being distributed by legitimate distribution platforms. And so what role do they play in terms of content moderation and ensuring that content like this is taken down and not used? But at the same time, they may also be parties who are involved, as we saw in this inquiry and as we're seeing in Australia, that Google benefits from web scraping in terms of news articles, news video clips. They get posed up in which they are able to derive some form of advertising funding from that. And then there's also the question around pirated content from our broadcasting platforms, whether it be TV, radio, or cinema, where that content is being distributed across the internet. It's being found through sites like Google, and then Google also may benefit from, and the site creators themselves who are distributing this pirated content would benefit from the advertising that appears. So it's not just also the Google and Facebooks of the world, Meta and that, but one also has to look at the advertisers that they themselves don't pay attention to the fact that their advertisements are being scrolled across a website, benefiting that website, and yet that benefit is not coming back to the people who created the content, whether it be ETV, MultiChoice, or SABC, Prime Media. That content has been stolen, and yet nothing has been done, and the advertisers are benefiting the people who have stolen it. So those are big questions. I don't know if the Competition Commission's inquiry will only be the only one that would be able to deal with it, because they are looking at it in a very narrow sense. But definitely it's the question of the updating of various laws, whether it be the Cybercrime Act, whether it be the copyright legislation. I know there's an amendment, but we all know that amendment's dating back from 2015. So it practically has ignored AI and generative AI completely, and the big questions about the intellectual property theft there. So it's one of those areas where we do need government to step in, put an overarching policy framework in place to deal with all these various concerns, and then drill down into the national legislation. What needs to amend it? What acts need to be? Do we need to amend the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act when it relates to takedowns, and what can be taken down? What penalties should be imposed on digital platforms that are distributing content which is harmful to people, which has been stolen from other media platforms? And so those are the big questions that need to be addressed. I don't think it can only be addressed within the context of the Competition Commission's inquiry into digital platforms, because there are some other issues broader than that which they are dealing with.
Thank you, Aynon. We have come to the end now. So thanks to everybody who joined us today. Thank you to you, Aynon, for making time for this insightful presentation. We're just going to need to see whether we can upload it. And if so, it will be on our YouTube page. So thank you, everybody, for joining us once again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.